What's going on, everybody? It's your boy C-Zar, and we are talking about Bitcoin today, BTC USD. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it, my friends. It is the 5th day of March, and here we are at about $72.5 thousand. We are moving up, and I was wrong. Let's call a spade a spade. I was wrong. I was wrong all along. This whole time, what I was saying was that we would likely see, in my expectation, what was likely was that we would see a lower low, because that's typically what we see in these consolidation ranges. But we didn't. You know, I did address that we could see a higher low, and there was a little bit of time where we accepted that as a possibility, but I shortly then after wrote that off as soon as we saw this like dump back down. I took that as a sign that this was a bull trap and that we were going to come back down. As we were moving up, we didn't really have a whole lot of volume, but man, yesterday we got the volume, we got the move. I don't want to linger on it too long. It is what it is. I feel like I've been on a bit of a dry streak with Bitcoin specifically. And it just is what it is. Let's hopefully get over that hump and see if we can make some correct calls for once in the last month. 72, and again, I shouldn't be too hard on myself because I was bearish here. I was literally bearish at every single top. I was cautiously optimistic here. We were calling for a pullback, but I did say I gave it a condition. I said if we go below 66K, we're going to assume that we go lower than either of these lows. I did expect that we'd pull back to like 67, 66K if we were to move higher, but we kind of gave it a 50-50 chance of doing whatever, right? But we were definitely optimistic there for a second. Anyways, enough of that. We're moving up. We got the daily higher close. We've got the volume increasing, and look at the difference, right? You can see the difference here. Look at this move. Look at the volume. Look at this move here, right? You see the volume? Do you see the difference? And this took so much longer to achieve. None of these highs here had the same level of volume that we have here, right? So, and then also on top of that, if I could, can I do this? Let me just see here real quick. Try to make it more obvious to see here. Can you see how the histogram in the volume? This is the average, the volume average here over a 45-day period. Can you see how it's increasing? We've had volume increase on a 45-day basis on the average for this range here, and still we're getting above average volume and above volume that we saw here. This looks legitimate. And I've got a friend who's been in crypto about as long as I have, and he's definitely made some very good calls, especially on the macro scale, and he's got some good insights and thoughts, and he's like a madman, man. He pays attention to everything in the markets, whether it's on YouTube or just doing his own analysis on the side. But he gave me a really good idea, and I'm not trying to take credit for anybody else's work if he got this from somebody else's YouTube channel, but you know, I don't really have time to watch other people's YouTube videos, so he told me this idea yesterday. I'm sure some of you have heard it, that because of what's going on in Iran, the Iranian currency's taken a dump, and because of that, Iranians are flocking to Bitcoin. And this is something that's actually happened before. Iranians in prior bull cycles have flocked to Bitcoin, and Iran for a time actually had the most expensive Bitcoin. Their government placed a tax on Bitcoin where it was like, it was literally, I don't know what the price would have been like. It was like if you were buying Bitcoin at $5,000, you were paying $10,000 or $15,000 a coin for it. Like, you were paying dramatically more money, but people were still buying it because, again, you know, they didn't trust their currency, they didn't trust the regime. Now that the regime is not toppled, everybody on the right is too quick to say that we ended a dictatorship. No, they still got shit going on, man. They still got a lot going on. And I'm not a politician. I'm not a geopolitical analyst, right? I pay attention. There's another Ayatollah in charge now, right? But they're fighting back, and the U.S. is helping. When I say they, I mean the majority of the Iranian people that are not religious bat nut jobs. But anyways, I don't want to get too political. Again, this isn't a political channel. The main thought here is that the Iranian currency is in trouble. Iranians, which Iran, regardless of its status right now, is still a very wealthy country. If they're flocking to Bitcoin, that makes sense why the price might pump up. You know, it makes a lot of sense. And then Ben Cohen, if you guys watch Ben Cohen's videos or like paid attention to what he said on X.com, he made a very good comparison of this consolidation range to this consolidation range back here whenever the Ukraine and Russia conflict, the war, started back then, right? We saw some increase then as well. Inevitably a dump. It happened in the midst of a bear market, and I do expect that we will see lower prices. I definitely do. But I've got a couple of ideas that I want to address here. I don't know if I want to talk about the short-term stuff because, again, I feel like I've really had a dry streak on the short-term stuff, and just call it what it is, man. I don't think I've ever had this long of a dry streak with Bitcoin in my existence as a technical analyst. And there might be various reasons for that, but this isn't therapy hour for C-Zar, or this is really just trying to do some TA hour with C-Zar. So we're going to do some long-term stuff. We're going to shift the scope a little bit. I want to talk about the possibility. I don't believe this personally, okay? I don't believe this personally. I just want to talk about the possibility of, if I'm wrong, as crazy as that might be, if I'm wrong, and this was the low. Imagine that this was our little bear market correction and that this was the low. We're going to take that stance. My first argument would be, and my first thought in that sense would be, is this a bear market then? If that was the lowest price that we had, is that a bear market? Are we in a bear market if we don't go any lower? Like, would this be considered a bear market? 5 months of downside. Every bear market we've had since Bitcoin's existence has been longer than this, has been much longer than this. And we look back at this in the very, very first bull cycle. A lot of people call this the first bear market, but again, that was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months of downside. On the 4th month, we actually had the low. Or no. On the 5th month, we did have the low. And there's some people who theorize this, and I don't know if I openly theorize this myself, but I accept it as a possibility where this wasn't a bear market. This was just one big super cycle. This is one big bull market for Bitcoin in its existence, and then this was the first bear market. And this being the first bear market kind of makes sense because the way that this behaved, and then thereafter the crab market, the stagnation, and how long it took to move up, that's exactly the template that we had for every other bear market that we saw, and then thus the bull markets as well for in Bitcoin's history, where this was kind of a one-off. It's as if it was one big super cycle. Looking back, especially comparing these bear markets here, and even this bull market here, where we saw 19 months that we did not get above this high. It took 19 months until we got above that high there. It certainly makes me think that this wasn't a bear market, but an overall correction, okay? Running with that idea, corrections defined by Elliott wave theory, not that corrections are defined by Elliott wave theory, but as defined by Elliott wave theory, are typically, whenever you have a trend, a correction is that part where you pull back before you continue higher. It's just a correction, right? Here, this was a little correction. Here, this was a correction, right? This is another correction. Elliott wave theory, things move in waves. So you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-legged count, and then whenever you correct, this is your upward sloping move. When you correct, you get a 1, 2, 3-legged count. Okay. We look at this on a monthly time frame. It doesn't really seem like we've got a 1, 2, 3-legged count, but if you take this on a weekly time frame, the 3-legged count becomes obvious, right? 1, 2, 3, and it's really a perfect correction. Corrective waves, and I'm not the most experted person on Elliott wave theory, but I know enough. I don't know if I know enough. I think you have to know. I think you need a deep understanding, and then you know enough. But I know enough about the corrections. I know about wave formations and Fibonacci retracements to have an idea. Corrections, an ABC correction like this, I mean, that's literally what we have. They're typically very symmetrical, right? You have your initial move down, the correction within the correction, and the next move down should represent the first move. Oftentimes this one is a little larger or maybe even a little smaller, but they're very, very symmetrical. It doesn't have to be symmetrical, but again, understand what I'm saying here. We're running with this idea that this could have been one giant move up and that this is the correction. If that's the case, if this is like your wave, think of this as like as if we are in a potential super cycle, as if there were no lower low here to go. And again, I don't think that personally. If I was to make the call, I would think that we do see lower prices. I would think that we do go potentially even below 50K sometime in Q3 of this year. That's my expectation. If we don't go below 50K sometime by the end of this year, maybe we still kind of stagnate and we're like in this giant large consolidation phase. I don't think that we're off to the races right now. We're definitely, you know, not in a bull market, at least not from my expectation. But if this were to be a correction, imagine that was the low and we were to move up from here. The idea of this being wave 1 and this being wave 2, wave 3 would be coming. And in that sense, in this sense, if you know anything about Elliott wave theory, wave 3 is very typically the largest wave that you see. In a 5-legged count, corrections are 1, 2, 3-legged counts. They're ABCs, and then impulsive movements that continue with the trend. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-legged counts. And sometimes in those counts you can have smaller counts as well, like I think we did here. You can have counts within counts, waves within waves. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, if this is wave 1 and if this is wave 2, then through Elliott wave theory, we could deduce that wave 3, which would effectively be the next bull market, would likely be larger than the last bull market. It's just an idea. It's just a theory. And this is something that I thought about yesterday because, again, I have been so wrong. And and one of my buddies who's been very, very accurate with the macro stuff, he's and not just this cycle, but prior cycles as well. He's actually been killing it. Not catching the exact top, not catching the exact bottom, but catching on well before the majority of people. Well before the majority of people. If this were to be a wave 3, if we were to continue to move on from a low to a high here, let's just say like this was the end. We don't have to take the fake out high. I don't know what the rules are on that, but I'm not going to take the fake out high. Let's just call this wave 1. Imagine that this were wave 2 here. That would then imply that wave 3, again, would be bigger than the last wave. If this were the case, then we would likely see a Bitcoin that is above or around at least $500,000, maybe even more than that, by the end of this next cycle. And time-wise, you know, if we were to take that same time, that could be, you know, late 2028. I don't know if I expect that personally, and we can go over why I don't expect that real quick. As far as like timing goes, I could expect this as far as price growth goes, but I don't know if it'll line up in the same kind of time dynamic. And the reason why is because typically Bitcoin itself doesn't see new all-time highs until about 2 years after it finds its bear market low. Okay, so new all-time highs here. I guess that's a year and a half there. Year and a half that it found new all-time highs. You've got your bear market low here. You saw new all-time highs here. That was 700 days. It's about 2 years after. A little bit less than 2 years after, right? Like about a month less than 2 years after, but still. You got your bear market low here, and we're going to call this the bear market low, not the second attempt. This is a bear market low and then a crab market. And notice here as well that in your bear market low, you had a 1, 2, 3 correction. You had an A, B, C correction. Notice here in this bear market, we had an A, B, C correction as well, right? And there was a slightly lower low here, but this is still, I think, all part of the same movement, more or less. Or maybe it could have been a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could have been. It's possible, you know, depending on the wave count. Again, I'm not the most experted person in this, but you can see these wave counts playing out. This here was more of a consolidation phase, but still, 1, 2 correction within the correction, and then 3. 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2 was the correction within the correction, and then 3, impulse down. A 3-legged move nonetheless. You take the low of the bear market, not the low of the crab market, not the double bottom, but the bear market ended here, right? The low of the bear market, and we take that to the point of which we find a new all-time high, which would have been somewhere around here. That was about 770 days. So again, about 2 years, a little bit more this time, a little bit more, a little bit less, year and a half after the lows, right? And then this one might have moved faster. This is before the first halving. Let's see. Low. When did we get above it? Got above it about there. That was about a year and a half as well. So year and a half, 2 years, 2 years, year and a half. okay? If this were to be the bear market low, we wouldn't see a new all-time high until at the earliest somewhere in April of 2027, or at the latest, at the very latest from what we've seen, about somewhere in like February of 2028. That doesn't mean that we're moving down until 2027 April. That doesn't mean we're moving down until that time in 2028. That just means we wouldn't see a new all-time high until one of these time frames, based on what we've seen before from our lows and stuff, right? Now, another theory here is that maybe some of this macro stuff that we're comparing from the early days might not be relevant, because again, this was pre-institutional money. Not necessarily. Institutions have been in crypto since like 2015, but at the scale that they are now, it's a lot less retail dominated. At the market cap levels we're at now, it's a lot more institutionally dominated. It's possible that these dynamics are forever changed and they might not happen. We might see something different, maybe to a quicker effect, maybe to a longer effect. It might happen the exact same way. And this was an institutional cycle. We had ETFs and all this stuff come in, and we still topped off at a place that was very, very relevant to the 4-year cycle. So even with this, we're still respecting the 4-year cycle to some degree, right? And the business cycle that everybody thought that we were going to respect, that we all got on board with expecting that to happen, the business cycle was actually the thing that we disrespected, not the 4-year cycle. The 4-year cycle actually upheld, the business cycle flopped for crypto. Not for stocks, not for commodities, but for crypto. Just laying out some thoughts there. Anyways, this thought would then imply that we're not at new all-time highs until somewhere in this range. Are we going to go from this level up to $500,000 in a year from here, in less than a year from here? I don't know if I believe that to happen. So again, just getting back to that original thought, let me just go all the way back, delete all these things. I don't know if this trajectory plays out this way, but I would still expect, if this were to be some type of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if we were in a super cycle, that we would see something that is larger than $500,000, because 1, 2, 3, the third leg is typically larger than the first leg. The third leg is typically the largest move in any 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-legged impulse move to the upside, okay? Just a thought, just a theory. And that theory, I think, it has some likelihood to it. It has a chance, so long as this low prevails. And there's a lot of signs, there's a lot of reasons for this low to prevail. There's a lot of reasons for it to go lower as well. But we look at the monthly time frame here, and you look at the RSI, we are at some of these low levels where typically Bitcoin has bottomed in its existence before. We are in a bit of a downtrend, lower lows and lower highs, and with that, typically I would expect that we do see lower lows. That we do see lower lows, but again, we're running with this idea. If this was just my call, my expectation, I would honestly think that we do see lower lows, that we might even bounce right off the oversold zone on the monthly RSI, and that would be perfect, in line with all these lows here. That makes sense to me, and if that's the case, we do have a lower low coming. Likely, we do. Unless we see some type of like massive recovery and then we come down. If we were to get a lower low in the RSI but a higher low in the price, that'd actually be very, very bullish. And there's a scenario where that could happen if we pump up enough and then we come down, right? We might not be in a bull market necessarily, but we could be in some type of crab market, as Bitcoin likes to do at the end of every bull market that it's had. But this would be kind of a larger crab market at that rate. If we saw a larger crab market, then maybe something like this could play out. But again, I'm not necessarily running with what I'm expecting, because with what I'm expecting lately, I've been pretty off. So we're just taking a different thought, a different perspective. On the note of this being the low, where this monthly close was right at our prior cycle highs. I mean, structurally speaking, this is a really good place. This is a really good place to bounce, but it depends on how we bounce. If we were to confirm this as the low, as the quote-unquote bear market low, first off, I would question, are we in a bear market, or are we just in a super cycle? Is this just a correction in a super cycle? Because that could really make sense, guys. I mean, we've been so tame. This is the most tame bull market we ever had. What I learned in the early days from technical analysts is that this kind of structure allows growth to continue without a significant bear market, right? If you were to have a lesser of a bear market, it's stuff like this. And then if you were to have persistent growth, a super cycle, you're going to have more constructive behavior like this. So it is possible if we are in some type of a super cycle while still respecting the 4-year cycle, it's very possible that we could be entering a wave 3 here. And then again, structurally speaking, not just from a price perspective, but from an RSI perspective, from a perspective on the stochastics, from the perspective of the MACD even. We are at our bear market lows, right? We've got the lowest readings on the MACD that we've ever seen. We're in the oversold zone with the stochastics. Now, it would be really crazy. What we've never seen before in a bear market is the stochastics come out of the oversold zone and then come back in. Now, the blue line did here, but the stochastics, plural, is when the blue and the orange come out. They didn't come back in until the next bear market. When they came out here, they didn't come back in. Even during the COVID crash, they didn't come back in until the next bear market. Whenever they came out here, they didn't come back in until the next bear market, right? If this isn't a bear market, we're certainly getting bear market readings all across the board. So the thought here is, if this recovery in March, maybe in April, maybe going into May, it doesn't have to be full-blown bull market mode, but if this recovery is enough to turn the blue line out of the oversold zone and the orange line out of the oversold zone, whoever is expecting that this could be a bear market low, your likelihood goes up tremendously. Your likelihood goes up tremendously. And with that, let's see. I would even say if the RSI can get back above the 50, that might be the equivalent of what we're seeing here with the stochastics. So these are things to look for in the coming months. Weekly time frame here. Typically, in the bear market, we do get oversold. Typically, we do. And what we've seen, and again, this is the end of our bear market here. This is the end of our bear market here, and this is like the end of our bear market as well. Typically, once you get oversold and you come out, you don't get back into the oversold zone. If you do, it's like barely. I want to analyze these moments here and compare them to the possible pathways that we have going forward. So let's just do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a line both at the beginning and at the end of these oversold interactions. So both at the beginning here, oops, that was a little bit ahead of schedule or late on the schedule there. Let's move it back. Right there. And we're not going to count that. That's like a rejection. That's like you bounced off the oversold zone. Yes, you got into it, but we're not going to count that. That was the COVID crash, okay? Black Swan event, crazy. Got into it there. Came out of it here. Yes, you're technically in the oversold zone here, but you're bouncing off it. Same thing, right? Just like here, you didn't get oversold, but I guess actually you didn't even cross that threshold. In, and then assuming that this week doesn't shit the bed, by Sunday, if we do see some volatility by the end of Sunday, then this point will be moot. But as long as we close here or higher, as long as we get a green week, I would say we even need more than a green week. It has to be, we'd probably have to close this week above 70K. We can come back down. 3 days, 10 hours left. We could go back down below 70K, but as long as we're closing above 70K by the end of the week, I would think that we do get out of this oversold zone on the RSI. The point here being that once we got into the oversold zone, we still had lower to go. Okay? Once we got into the oversold zone here, Bitcoin dropped another 64%. And it didn't just drop 64%. This took about 133 days, almost half a year. Well, maybe would that be more like a third of a year? Probably closer to a third than a half, but that's a little bit over a third. So let's say like 40% of a year, something like that. 19 weeks. Okay. And that's whenever you got out of the oversold zone. Not when you found your low, but out of the oversold zone. Maybe we should do it in accordance to where the low was. Where the low was on the 18th week, actually. Let's do that. And that is closer to about a half year, or a third of a year. Here, when you got oversold, it was a lot shorter, right? From here, it was about a 3-week period before you found your low. And from the time that you got into the oversold zone, which would have been, was it on that week there? Was it at the end of that week? It would have been at the end of this week, so that actually would have been from this closing point here. You only dropped another I say only. Nobody would want to lose 20%, but you only dropped another 20%. So it's a big difference from 64% to 20% there. Here, in the last bear cycle that we had, once we got oversold, once we closed that week, to the low that we had before we got out of the oversold zone, that was 43.8%, but we still did drop overall more. Now, this was kind of an interesting interaction, wasn't it? Because we actually had our low, our bear market low, outside of this dynamic with the RSI, just to show that we can do this and we still can go lower over time. And I think a lot of the OGs weren't necessarily expecting this low. They were either expecting that we'd go dramatically lower or that this was the low. So this was a nice little fake out here for a lot of people. But nonetheless, it's still that 50%. That's right in between 20% and 64%. It's kind of odd in itself. They're all kind of odd in their own ways, right? None of them are really the exact same. Here, we're getting in and we're getting out. This short gap here, this short gap in time, would probably be most comparable to something like this, okay? It would probably be most comparable to something like that. If we saw us getting into the oversold zone here and we take it down to the low, that's about 38% of a drop. Again, well within this range. It's a smaller drop percentage-wise. This was a smaller drop percentage-wise. And then again, the time frame is a lot shorter as well, as long as we close here, right? It's still presumptuous to assume that we're closing here, but 3 days, 10 hours left. Things do look good in the charts. You know, we'll see how it goes. The markets are still fearful, right? Even with this pump, even with this very bullish engulfing candle on a weekly time frame, the markets are still bearish and fearful. This doesn't mean that we can't go lower, right? We did see lower prices here. But what I'm curious is if we were to go lower, in this one time that we actually saw lower prices after the RSI got out of the oversold zone, how much lower did we go from this low here? From the low to that low, we only went 12% lower. That's really not that intimidating, is it? So I can't imagine then that if we go lower than this low here, that we would go too much lower. We could go lower than more than 12%, but I doubt that we go anything like 20% or more. You know, 47K. Therefore, I mean, prices below 50K from this perspective seem pretty unlikely. They seem pretty unlikely. If we were to do 12% or less, that would imply then that we don't go below 52K. We might not even make it below 53K. And again, that doesn't mean that we can't go lower than the low that we have here. It just means that we would see likely some type of stagnation and then a quick fake out to the downside, and then we could be moving up. Something like that could be happening. Or something different entirely. It's hard to say at this point in time. Stochastics are coming out of the oversold zone, and typically this is a really good thing on the weekly time frame. We have bullish divergence on the weekly MACD, and typically that's a very good thing on the weekly time frame. Getting in and then out of the oversold zone like this with the weekly RSI, same thing. That's a good thing. It's typically what we see at the end of a bear cycle. That doesn't, and more of an end from a price perspective, less of an end from a time perspective. I shouldn't say that. An ending in price and maybe even in time, but that doesn't mean that it's the beginning of the bull cycle in itself, right? Typically, again, bear markets end with a bang and a whimper. And while this volatility is nice, while being up 10% this week is nice, that doesn't really seem like a whimper, does it? Over the months, we could still see some volatility. It is possible that we see a slightly lower low. And in that kind of context, you know, we're forming some type of crab market. We're consolidating going into like the majority of this year, through this year, and then maybe we start a bull market as we typically have seen before, right? We had a bang and then a whimper, right? A bang and then a whimper. This was a small whimper. This is only a couple of months here, or about a month and a half there, right? We had a bang and then a whimper here. We were consolidating. We had a bang and then a whimper for like a year. We were moving sideways here, and in this quote-unquote whimper, we saw a lot of excitement and despair, right? But it was really just a sideways range for quite a while there. So regardless of what path we might take, I think the most obvious path, regardless if you're thinking that this is the end of the bear market, if you think that we could go a little bit lower or not, the most obvious path from here should be that we are going to still be consolidating more or less. We're not going to be throwing on the afterburners and moving up. But time will tell. I don't really have anything else to say. I hope I gave you guys enough to think about. Hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for being here. We can do the short-term stuff a little bit. You know, volume's coming in. The RSI does look good. We're rejecting the overbought zone, and that's not necessarily nice, but there's an hour and a half left in this 4-hour time frame. We can definitely move up here. Stochastics look good. The MACD does look good at this point in time. We are at a kind of make it or break it point, because if we were to come back down and close below basically 71K, 71.4K on any daily time frame from here, that could look bad. That really could look bad. Bitcoin's been throwing a lot of people off. We've been getting fake outs left and right. We could get that closed. That's the low itself, and then boom. Then we move up. Right? Time will tell. But I don't have really anything else that I want to go over. I think I've said everything I need to say. The daily time frame is looking strong. The 4-hour time frame is looking strong, and the weekly time frame is showing some resilience as well. Regardless of if this is the low or not, if we go lower or not. For a while here, I was assuming that we'd go below 50K, but after this video, I'm a little bit less sure that we go below 50K. I'm a little bit more sure now. I even acknowledged in the possibility that this could be the low, whereas that's not something that I was really addressing before. That's not something that I accepted as a possibility. It's not what I would bet on. It's not the likelihood that I would give. But again, from my perspective, I don't know if that really has any weight, because I've been on a bit of a dry spell with Bitcoin lately. So I mean, it's very possible this could be the low. And they gave us a bull market that was unlike any other, that threw a lot of people off because it didn't give us what we expected. We didn't get enough. What if we see the same thing with the bear market? What if people are expecting more to go down? But again, this is the institutional cycle. This is the nation state cycle. This is the time when people are really making heavy bets on Bitcoin, and they see it for what it is, as an anti-inflation kind of shield, and like a safe haven for your assets, right? No matter what's going on for global conflicts or whatever, if your currency craps out, Bitcoin is still here. Bitcoin will never crap out, even if it's down in a bear market. Even if it's down 80%, it never craps out, right? Where like if a world currency drops 80%, that's very difficult to come back from, where Bitcoin's done that multiple times in its life. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a walk in the park for Bitcoin. It would definitely be interesting. This would definitely throw a lot of people off if that was the bear market low. But again, we had a bull market that a lot of people didn't expect, that we were expecting more to go, right? It wasn't just me. It was like 80, 90% of the market, right? There were very few, most of the OGs, right? And I'm a crypto OG myself. We were all thinking that we'd go up higher, at least above 200K. There were very few OGs who were saying that this was the top and that we'd be forming a bear market now. And a lot of them, most of those OGs actually got on board with that once we broke the 50-week moving average. I feel like I was one of the last OGs to hold out for the idea that this is a bull market up until we got to this lower low point here, right? Anyways, I got nothing else to say. I hope I gave you some thoughts to think about. Hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you on the next one. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.